Hello, everybody, and welcome to Banner Building a New Reality's Expanding Restorative webinar series. This is part 4 of 4 that we've done this fall, and I thank you so much for being with us. Um, we have a really fun program scheduled for you today and very dear to my heart. I'm bringing together my different worlds because I am a teacher and core staff member at North Star Self-Directed Learning for Teens in Western Massachusetts, as well as communications director for Building a New Reality. And I'm just really excited to be sharing this with you because it's about restorative. It's about a place that is restorative and about a place that's in general treating kids and families in a really different way, which I think you're all going to enjoy hearing about today. Let me see. I'm just welcoming people and seeing that people are joining. Let me get the chat. It's always nice if folks want to chat in. Where you are from, and make sure you click on everyone. So it may say hosts and panelists there in the chat bar, but if you click on everyone and just let us know where you're from and anything else about your area of work, it would be lovely to just get a flavor of who's here and what you're up to. Um, this is the Expanding Restorative series. Ted wrote a paper back in the spring that he delivered in Tallinn, Estonia at the Restorative Forum, European Forum for Restorative Justice, and expanding the restorative continuum to include not just the kind of interactions and circles and conferences for behavior and crimes that we have typically been talking about in restorative practices, but also large group decision making, which we've covered in some of our other webinars in this series. But I think what's interesting about this is another facet of what Ted's been talking about, expanding restorative into 6 facets of life, including governance, care, justice, learning, enterprise, and spirit. And in the area of learning, we think about schools as a place where kids learn, and there's certainly been a lot of restorative practices work that's taken place in schools across the US, across Canada, across the UK, in Europe, in Australia, and many other places, even beyond that, South America, Africa. We have in Asia. I shouldn't forget anybody. Um, and But I think this is a peculiar interest to Ted that this idea of compulsory education, and is this okay to make people do things? Is it okay to make people learn? And what would happen if we didn't force them to be in school and if we didn't force them to be in these places? And is that a restorative idea? Um, so um, we're gonna get this kicked off right now. I'm gonna introduce Ted to start things off, and he's going to share a little bit about his vision of Beyond the Schoolhouse, which is the title of a book he actually wrote in 1977 when he was just leaving the school system and striking out into alternative education, which would eventually lead to restorative practices. Um, and then I'm going to let him talk, and then I'm going to be back as a guest as well today to speak a little bit about North Star, what it's like, why I think it's restorative, what that looks like in that context, and then we'll be joined by our guests Ellen Morbyrne and Ken Danford. So, all right, here we go. Ted, would you turn on your screen?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I'm this book, Beyond the Schoolhouse. I really didn't publish it till a few years ago. I hid it from the world because I was selling services to schools, and I thought they might get angry at me. But uh, learning for a new reality is essentially uh, how I was thinking about learning. And I just want to share. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs here from the second chapter of this book, and it'll sort of, I hope, set the framework for why I'm really glad we're here today. The day before I started my first year of teaching, I put the following quotation from George Santayana on the bulletin board in ominous black letters. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And the quotient stayed up for several weeks until I changed it to a display of historic political cartoons. One day, a pleasant girl in one of the tech school sections asked me about the quotation. She said, "I just want to train horses. Why must I study history?" I proceeded to explain the importance of learning from the past, analyzing events and actions that have occurred in order to make better choices when faced with similar situations. She persisted. "But Mr. Wachtel, what if I don't really care about all that? I don't even know if I want to vote. Why must you make us study if I forget it all anyhow?" I could not answer her question. I still can't. Why not just teach history to people who want to study history? Why do we force people to study anything against their will, especially when they probably do what they want to do and not what we want to make them do? And Susan and I both were teaching at the time, she in elementary schools. And in 1976, we started our own alternative school. And it was the closest we could get to trying out a whole more liberal way of working with kids. Uh, but it wasn't until Josh got a job at North Star many years later that I saw that, in the current context, and particularly with the whole notion of homeschooling, which I'm sure, Ken and Josh can explain, it actually made it possible to allow kids not to go to school. And I think fundamentally, I hate to say it this way, but a lot of reason we need restorative practices for discipline and behavior in most schools, public and private, is because a large percentage of the people don't want to be there. And what would it be like if you're driving to school and you're thinking, as a teacher, and thinking, everybody in that building is there because they want to be there. Well, that's what happens at North Star. So I'm going to leave it to others. Should I click this off, Josh, the video?
Yes. All right, let me just get this set up. All right. So, thank you, Ted. And I'm really happy to be kicking this off. So, as I said at the beginning, and for those who are just joining, uh, I'm director of communications for Building a New Reality Foundation, but I'm also a 3-day week teacher and core staff member at North Star Self-Directed Learning for Teens. And we are based in Western Massachusetts, in Sunderland, Massachusetts now. Was founded 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, in Amherst, Massachusetts, and has moved to several locations. It turns out you need a building to do this in a cold place. Maybe there's some more places where you could uh, do this kind of education in a different way. But first, I want to just start out by telling you a little bit about North Star. Uh, and there are other centers based on the North Star model, Liberated Learners, and it's great to see some folks involved in that network who are on this call. Uh, and but North Star is located in a building, a 2-story building. What used to be a multi-use office building, but now it's one center. It's got a common room, which is unusual. It's one of the first things that people see when they come and visit. And you walk in, and there's some staff at desks, maybe at a computer or something, but mostly you see couches and chairs and carpets and tables and kids, sitting around chatting and or playing games, reading a book, or doing any number of things. And it's a very relaxed kind of atmosphere. And so, in some ways, this whole thing is a teen center first. It's a place where kids can come from 9 to 4 o'clock in our case during the days, and B. And then there's the rest of it. So the rest of the fourth floor has a kitchen, an office area, some more sitting rooms for other kinds of meetings or quiet work or a class to happen. There's a library on the first floor, and then upstairs we have the benefit of having some more classrooms, a nice studio where music and dance and theater could happen, um, and small offices for meetings. So that's kind of the lay of the land. And, there's outdoor space, which is lovely, blacktop in the back and grass and basketball net and, tables to also sit outside. So all this space is available. Uh, we're open 4 days a week. It's a 4-day-a-week program so that on Wednesdays, kids have to do something else. Uh, we have about 60 to 65 kids at the center right now. That number fluctuates somewhat. There are 9 or so full and part-time staff. We do have an America or volunteer. We also have a lot of volunteers from the community that will come in and maybe teach a class or do one tutor session with a kid. And I'll talk a little bit about that more as I go along. Um, so when you and I should say the other most important thing is that all the kids who are coming to North Star are on home school plans. So that's the legal basis because we're a center that does not give grades. We don't require attendance, as a matter of fact. We don't graduate anyone. We don't promote them, and so forth. So kids are on homeschool plans up to age 16 that their parents file with their school districts, which is a law in most states in the US and in other countries. There are some issues in some countries around this, but at this point, homeschooling is an accepted method of learning in the US, and so that's the basis we use. Um, Okay. So, and as far as what kids do, what do they do when they come? So when they come, they're assigned an advisor. So I have 6 or 8 advisees. Ken and Ellen, who will be talking later, also have a number of advisees we meet with the kids that we work with for at least a half an hour every week. So that's kind of a steady stream of an adult that kids have to check in with about what they're doing. There's a calendar of events, of a calendar of classes that happen. So throughout the day, there's math classes, history classes, science classes, psychology, dance, uh, and a lot of times we have really interesting titles: Mysteries of the Mind and Spirit, um, and music classes, and really anything you can imagine, and anything that a staff member wants to teach could go on that schedule and be available for kids to do. And typically, what we do is we schedule things on a weekly basis. So, kids will decide what days they want to come. They might come all 4 days that we're open, or they might decide there's certain things they want to do on Tuesdays and Thursdays that recur weekly, and they will set up their schedule that way. Um, then, as far as other learning activities, we also have one-on-ones. So we have, as I said, volunteers from the community, sometimes parents, sometimes college students. Some of them are on work study, so they can get paid for their service. And so when kids say to me, I really want to take the GED or the high set, which is a high school equivalency exam, they can start preparing for that. I can set them up with math tutoring or writing tutoring or science or social studies or whatever it is that they're interested in. And sometimes they want to learn a language. Sometimes I worked with a kid once on astronomy and navigation. So it's really anything that kids can think of. We try to build in the resources. It's not always meet everybody's needs, but we try our best. All right, so hopefully that gives you a sense of the program, and others will talk more. And just with the remainder of my time, I want to fit this a little bit into the restorative practices framework. So we uh, do things by restorative practices, which essentially means uh, we talk about things. We talk about how we want things to be. And then if things aren't that way, we talk about what went wrong, what's going on, how it could be better, how we could fix the problems. And that really is just kind of baked into the cake. Um, but there's a few ways specifically that we do that. So first, on the proactive side, what do we do up front as a basic maintenance of restorative practices? First, we have a community agreement that talks about the kinds of behaviors that are expected and welcome, that kids want this to be a welcoming environment and pleasant environment for everybody. There are some specific do nots. We don't welcome drugs and alcohol. We don't welcome smoking and vaping. And there are other positive ends, like we expect everybody's going to participate in cleaning and helping things, maintaining a nice social environment and a functional environment. Um, and that will be referred to throughout the year if issues come up. The advisor relationship, as I mentioned, is another space where we have one-on-one contact with kids and with their families, because the advisor also provides a connection with students' families, and we will schedule a certain number of meetings with families each year so that families, kids, and the staff at North Star can all be on the same page about, what is the kid working on, uh, what they're doing, what they want to be doing, and what needs can be met and what resources are available. So we have that ongoing relationship where all kinds of things can come up and can be discussed. And further, we have a community meeting, which is once a week, 30-minute meeting, where all the kids who are there on that day will join us. And in that meeting, we talk a lot about the norms. We check with people about how things are going. We of course have announcements about scheduling and things that are coming up, but we also use that a time for playing, getting to know each other, and when there's problems, we have a forum where people can talk about it. When it's a community issue, how are we going to clean the dishes? How are we going to use the space? So it's winter time. There's a lot of people in here. How can we work out these? People are too loud. They need more space. Maybe there's ways that we can work on this. And often kids have a lot of input into what might work and how they feel about how things are going, which of course, when kids hear from each other, it's such a powerful experience. And then finally, when things are more serious, we also use restorative practices. Uh, Often, small circles, one-on-one conversations. I think one of the most important restorative practices is those one-on-one conversations. But then bringing in other kids, other staff who are impacted by actions. And I'm not going to go too much into that right now. Sometimes there are serious incidents. We've had incidents of vandalism in the community, and in those cases, kids will have to go home. It's not a suspension, but it's sort of a timeout, and they may have to come back, talk to us with their parents. They might have to make reassurances that they understand what was wrong about what happened and how they can assure that these kinds of things won't happen again. And and so we have, those kinds of restorative practices in place. And on a simpler level, if people are having conflicts, social conflicts with each other, kids can bring up to staff, hey, this is happening. I'm concerned about this person. We say, all right, well, are you willing to come and sit down and talk? And and we do that. And we bring people together and try to talk it through. So, and then the last thing I want to say before I turn over the stage here is that in terms of restorative practices and expanding restorative practices, I think this whole model, in some sense, is restorative. And Ted, in another in the expanding restorative paper, said that his vision for a new reality is that freedom of education would stand alongside freedom of religion as a basic human right. And centers like North Star and Liberated Learners and the concept of homeschooling is moving towards that. And it's providing, we get to provide an institution where we're very much working with uh, students, with families, and supporting them to learn how they want, to live how they want through their teenage years and develop. And I think that's a fundamentally restorative ethic that I'm happy to be sharing and introducing to this audience. And I hope that that continues to grow and be understood. All right, so thank you. And at this point, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Ellen Morbyrne. Ellen is a wonderful, wonderful person who was a student at North Star way, way, way back. We met when I became core staff, and she was already a staff member for about a year before me. And I'm going to let Ellen share her experience in her history at North Star.
Thank you, Josh. Wonderful to be here with everybody today. I hope that I'm coming through relatively clearly. So I believe that Josh had gotten through, I think we heard him saying, so I'm Ellen. I was a member of North Star as a student when I was 13. I joined during North Star's first founding year, back when it was called Pathfinder. And then after being a member for a few years through my teen years, I then returned as actually a volunteer when I was 19, and started teaching there and basically stayed volunteering or working in some capacity from then, and then joined the core staff in 2010. And I've been on core staff since then. And then just a couple of years ago, my own children started attending North Star, which was not a given, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but it is the choice that they made. And it is a wonderful adventure that we're on together as a family. So I've been asked to just share a little bit about that journey of being student, staff, parent, and especially in this context of not just alternative education, but this idea of what impacts did that model of education have on myself as a person, in the world, and in this idea of being a restorative, a proactive restorative practitioner in my own life and in my communities. So I will say that when I joined North Star, Josh mentioned that we use homeschooling as the legal mechanism for kids to be able to opt out of traditional school in our region. But I really loved when I was a teenager, the fact that it changed learning into a verb, because I didn't say or into a personal active verb, because I didn't say that I was homeschooled, which is what people were used to hearing about homeschoolers. I said I was a homeschooler. I was homeschooling. And I was frequently saying that I was homeschooling myself because both of my parents were really busy. We weren't familiar as a family with alternative education. We didn't have access to financial resources for private school. We didn't have any experience with alternatives to traditional school. My mom was a full-time college student going back to get her degree later in life. My dad was working. There was no one to homeschool me, and it wasn't even on our radar. And so the first sort of liberatory experience that I had with this model of education was that a friend of mine was having a terrible time in seventh grade and said, "Hey, there's a new center open that's going to help me and my family, and we're going to homeschool." And I went home to my parents and I was like, apparently I don't have to go to school. Now, there was nothing particularly wrong, right? Like sometimes we think about a dramatic paradigm shift as being like because there's a crisis. And that's frequently what happens. We do get a lot of families in educational crisis, frequently up against systems that are not meeting their needs or just can't. But in my case, I was mostly really bored. I didn't have a lot of optimism about my middle and high school years. And I felt very much like, okay, I'm just in this wheel rut and I'm just going to be in it and get through. And then at some point in the future, like life will start, like real life will happen. But right now, I just like have to get through school. I enjoyed various educational successes. I got along with teachers. I'd had a really diverse educational experience before that because we moved all over the place. So I'd been in school in New York City, rural Connecticut, and Metro Manila in the Philippines before relocating to Western Massachusetts. So I had a lot of different schools to have these different experiences in. In that moment in seventh grade, I was just tired and bored and not thriving. So I was maintaining. I was maybe surviving. And it's possible that that would have gotten much worse over the course of my high school experience, knowing what I know now. I was undiagnosed with ADHD. I was dealing with my own neurodiversities in a system not designed to handle that. So there was a lot going on in this moment when North Star existed as a sudden option to say, you can leave school even if your family can't do it entirely by themselves. This is what Josh was saying about we need a building, we need a community, we need a network. This is an inherently collective and horizontal experience. I didn't need to rely on just my parents and their resources. I could step into this participatory collective environment. And at 13, that's very powerful. And I like to say that I really loved my teenage years. I really did. I had a great time as a teenager. So much fun. Things were hard. Things were challenging. Not everything went according to plan. There wasn't even always a plan, but it was lovely. I felt happy as an adolescent. And so when I switched up to, I'm not going to spend too much time on my own personal journeys, but I did end up going to a local community college and then to Smith College. I worked for many years with a professional theater ensemble. We traveled all over. All these things happened in my life, right? And I'm working, I'm trying to pay the bills at the same time. And amongst this collection of things, I started volunteering and then working at North Star, very young. And it was very empowering to feel, okay, now I get to see a little more behind the curtain. I start to see the intentional structure that the adults here are trying to hold for us young people. And I get to be part of that experience. And my experience as a staff member, especially when I stepped up to being a core staff member in 2010, when I had a 15-month-old and I needed to bring him to work with me, my experience was that it is an ongoing collaborative checking in process, and that it's inherently based on trust and mutual respect, and that if we don't trust each other on staff and we don't respect each other on staff, then it's not possible. And that same trust is required in our whole community. As a staff member, most of my time is spent behaving like I trust the kids. And so they feel that they can trust me. So we're non-custodial, we're non-compulsory. They can leave whenever they want to. They can go to the bathroom whenever they want to, which is inherently liberatory to listen to your bodily needs. They can eat whenever they want to. They can go inside, outside. And this can be really scary for those of us not used to that framework. But the building is there. The care is there. The adults are not ignoring the kids. We are lovingly observing them, and they know that we're there for them. So that was my experience of starting to peel back and understand these layers as a staff member. And as my child was entering toddlerhood, and we're now getting into my kids started going to North Star. So when they were little, I just assumed they were going to go to school. I was like, I don't know how to do elementary school education. I can't homeschool them at home. That's not a thing I know how to do. And it was my coworkers at North Star who were very supportive and said, what changes when your kid turns 5 that you suddenly don't know how to connect them to resources, that you don't know how to ask for help, that you don't know how to meet their needs of curiosity and help them pursue their interests. And so briefly, I'll just say that the journey of them heading towards North Star started accidentally when I was getting that information from my coworkers. I was comparing it to my own lived experience as a learner. I was comparing it to my partner's lived experience as a learner. And we were like working class artists. I couldn't afford preschool that I wanted to send my kid to because in the US, preschool is not free. And so I was debating how to set up our lives as young adults with new kids in our family. And so we built our lives around not needing school as childcare. And not everybody has that option, but since I did, we built our work lives around not needing school as childcare. And that was pivotal. By the time my older kid was 13, he was excited about the idea of being able to go to a space that would offer him tons of resources and tons of opportunities and tons of experiences without demanding or expecting anything of him that he wasn't already used to. Trust, collective effort and cooperation, respect. Like he was already used to these things. And the idea that there could be a center, that he wasn't going to miss out on group learning or group sort of educational and pursuits because he didn't want to go to a school model that was compulsory. That was really powerful and liberating for him too. And as a parent, it's been incredibly supportive and nourishing. Even with all my experience, I still needed the support of my colleagues and the community at North Star to feel like I'm not alone. I'm not doing this on my own. There are other grownups and tons of youth for my kids to connect with. And my kids are very different from each other. They're using it very differently. But it's been amazing to watch them just blossom into themselves fully and not have to navigate being themselves around an external compulsory system that is frankly not designed to sort of holistically meet individuals' needs in a collective setting, right? As Josh was saying, a lot of our model is inherently restorative. And so it does scale up. We do have trusting relationships with all of our kids. And so that plays out in how they choose to use the space. I could say more, but I am aware of time. So Josh.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. Yeah, and I'm so glad you focused on trust as a theme. I agree is the central factor. So we'll be able to go into all that more during the discussion. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Danford, the founder and director of North Star and author of Learning is Natural, School is Optional. And we'll hold up a, there we go. My
Oh,
dad's
look at
got
that.
the
All
other.
right.
All right. All right, Ken, I'm going to let you loose because I know
Okay.
you always have something
All
relevant.
right. But how many minutes do you want me to stick to?
Good. You got 10 minutes.
All right. Well, you guys are my heroes. You know, Ted Wachtel wrote a book brainstorming, outlining, imagining North Star well before I ever even thought of such a thing. So you know, he was ahead of his time, and so it's really great to be part of this community, and the restorative practices just mean so much to what we're doing here. I think that, and I see some familiar faces in this group. It's well, I can't see your faces. I see your names on the participant list. Warms my heart. Glad to be reconnecting with some of you. Um, for the purpose of today, I just want to say, in the short time that we have, that I started North Star in 1996 with Joshua Hornick to put myself and Josh in relationship with young people on our own terms. And that is to say that in school, as middle school teachers, Josh was science, I was social studies, we were not in a relationship that we wanted to be in with young people. We were forcing them to do work they didn't want to do. We were in charge of whether they could go to the bathroom or not, as just mentioned, which I found particularly insulting and demeaning. We were supposed to give tardiness. We were supposed to make them take off their hats and stand for the pledge and all the things that teachers are supposed to do in a controlling sort of way. And the school we were at was particularly, in my opinion, unnecessarily authoritarian. And I just couldn't see myself hollering at kids the rest of my life to do my U.S. history assignments so they could learn to be active citizens. It wasn't really happening. And I was just struck by, outside of schooling, these same kids had activities they loved. They had theater, they had sports and coaches and summer camps. They would cry when those things were over. They'd, be teary and sad to be at the conclusion of that season of whichever activity that was. They didn't cry about the end of school. They didn't cry about the end of 8th grade U.S. history with me. And I was like, well, how do I get that? How do I get myself in a position with kids who want to be with me, who aren't forced to be with me, and are sad when our time is over? And I couldn't see it happening. I was in a doctorate program for education to become an administrator, and I decided that wasn't going to work. That I couldn't make school that sort of place. That's not what schools are for. And that's a much deeper conversation. But at that time, Joshua Hornick, the co-founder, gave me a copy of Grace Llewellyn's Teenage Liberation Handbook, and I learned that unschooling was a thing. I had no such idea that that was even a thing. And so I saw unschooling as a way to put myself in relationship with kids where I wasn't in charge of them. I wanted to, release that arbitrary authority and resort to or rely upon natural authority of being a decent human being and hosting a center that didn't compel attendance, that didn't give grades, that didn't give credits, that didn't confer diplomas, that had nothing over these kids. And partly that's because of the shocking reality that nobody needs those things from an institution to get by in American culture. You don't need a high school diploma. You don't need a certificate from an authority figure like myself or an organization or a school. That the people who just leave school and do their own schooling and maybe pick up a GED or give themselves their own diplomas and do some community college and transfer on are on track earlier, better, more self-aware, healthier than the school team. And so if this whole enterprise isn't even necessary and it's unhealthy, let's just get rid of it. Let's just not be part of it, right? And so we conceived of how to support the teens in school to leave school with us. We never thought, this is 95, 96, that there were enough independent homeschooling youth and families who would want our services for that to be a business or even a social valued thing. But there were loads of kids in our school and the neighboring town schools and in private schools and charter schools who hated getting up every morning. And someone should tell these kids, hey, you don't really need to do this. And we have enough to offer you a functional, healthy, long-term alternative that could start today for as many of you who want to do it with no limits, with no admissions, with no lotteries, just leave school. And so that's been very powerful and very inspirational, and it remains so to this day. This week I'm still meeting young people, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds who hate going to school, and they're in their third or fourth school. They may have tried homeschooling during the pandemic or more recently in a way that did not work out very well for themselves and their families. And so they're back in a school for that they still don't like. And they come in here and I was like, well, have you ever just stop going? Don't go, and don't homeschool alone independently at home with your parents. Have a little community center to go to, as much or as little as you want. And here we are seriously in charge of hosting a pleasant, kind, caring environment, and we take that seriously, and that's what our staff jobs are doing. That's what Ellen and Josh are part of here. But we're not in charge of making kids learn, and the mission of North Star is not to produce any particular outcome that all kids go to college or all kids get a GED or all kids do community service or all kids are democratically engaged or any other thing that meant some of the schools we love and respect do. Our only mission at North Star, our core mission, is to make school optional for any interested teen in our community. And so we host a center that makes it possible for anybody who wants to stop going to school today. That yesterday was their last day of school. And we turn nobody away for money. We turn nobody away for being a hard case. Certainly over time, when restorative practices don't pan out as we wish, somebody may choose to leave, or we may rarely have to ask somebody to leave. But on the front end, we welcome everybody. And so that's a really gratifying space to be in for myself, to be in a place where I can tell anybody who hates waking up in the morning that I can help them change their lives right now in a way that maybe they didn't even know they could do. So that's what we're doing here, and I'm glad to be part of this with Josh and Ellen and Ted leading the way. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ken. And
Oh, do you want me to add about Liberated Learners real quick?
Sure, please do say.
Yeah, I forgot. And so in addition to this one center here in Western Massachusetts, North Star, we have a network that has included Compass Center in Ottawa with Abby Caros, and a new one with Ken Troutwine in Pennsylvania called Current Education Center. There's about a dozen centers right now, and we do monthly webinars that are free for anybody interested in the model through our Liberated Learners uh, uh, organization. If you go to liberatedlearners.net, you can do a free webinar, one-on-one consulting after that, and then we have a starters program. But we're here to try to support people to learn about our model and consider employing it in their own communities if they want to create such a thing. And so that's the other half of my work life, is sharing and supporting others to consider the model. There you go, Josh.
Great. Yeah, great. All right, so I'm going to invite you all to put Ted and Ellen also to put your video on. But I just want to say right now that we're going to go till 2 to my time. We're going to go up to the top of the hour. Then we will invite anybody who would like to join us to another Zoom room, which I'll put the link in the chat a little bit later, for small group discussions. And we'll do that for a half an hour after we're done talking here. If you have questions, I did see one in the chat, but there's a Q&A option. So please, if you have a question, we've got about almost 20 minutes and we'll be taking those questions. So type your question in the Q&A. Yeah, okay. Somebody asked how we're funded. Private, you want to take that, Ken?
Sure. We have a sliding fee scale that starts at $9,500 a year. That goes to $3,600 a year. We ask families to fit themselves inside that based on what they can afford to pay, and to a lesser extent, how much they're going to use North Star. And people who can't afford $3,600 at the low end of the sliding scale can ask for a fee reduction. And Ellen, who happens to be here, is in charge of that process and works with every family to arrive at a number they can afford. People who don't want to go through the process, will stretch to put down $3,600, and obviously families who can do more are encouraged and requested to pay, at the top end of the sliding fee scale, which, as you can immediately realize, is half, a third, a quarter of what private schools cost. Sure, we're not one of those items, and so the prices don't quite correspond, but still, $9,500 a year for a 4-day-a-week caring core program that makes something possible you wouldn't do without us. It's a pretty darn awesome thing, and the mission has always been to be as inclusive as possible. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and
I
as
just
an
yeah, I just want to chime in, especially since we're talking about restorative practices. I am a ferocious advocate for financial accessibility. We do not turn people away. I work very hard. I'm familiar with the systems of financial barrier in our country, particularly. And so I work very hard with families individually to coach and support them through our fee reduction process, and to make sure that nobody, if as long as they choose to be in communication and dialogue, nobody should be not coming because of money or struggling under payments they can't afford. So that is a moral commitment that we have as an organization that I uphold with the support and love of Ken. And I think that's key to why there's that financial trust as well as the academic trust.
And the remainder of the budget is from fundraising events such as hosting Circus Smirkus or the Giving Tuesday campaign with alumni that we just did yesterday and will do throughout the coming month. And some routine long-term donors, including board members and my parents and other loyalists who are donating. So we can do about a third, 25 to 30% of our budget with donations and fundraisers, and the rest of it is coming from fees from families. It's a small budget overall. We don't pay as much or employ as many people as you might think, or we're doing quite well. It's still relatively small.
Yeah,
it's hard.
It is. It's a challenge, but some people are doing it. We're doing it.
I saw earlier, I have to go back to, somebody asked, oh yeah, here. are restorative circles used at the center? You touched on that with the meeting a little, but you might want to.
Yeah. Absolutely. I once had a young adult, recent alum for North Star, come visit and talk to some current kids in the lobby, and she was like, they said something about, what's the worst thing you ever did at North Star, as teenagers like to ask. And she said, "Oh, I didn't do anything out of line with the community agreement at North Star." And they said, "Oh, why?" And she said, "Are you kidding me? Sitting in a circle and talking about our feelings and being honest with each other and having to own up to our responsibility." Like, she was like, "I would never, that was the worst thing I could possibly want to do." And it was very funny and totally spot on and humorous. But it was also then a deeper conversation about how we use circles, which she then participated in. She was like, "Oh, it's the best thing. I hated it, but it was the best thing because every time something went wrong, the worst thing we had to face was ourselves and each other." She was like, there was no immediate external automatic response other than, let's get in some circles, or if it's smaller, just face to face, right? And let's listen to each other, and let's be honest with each other, and let's stay in it until we get to a place we can move forward from. And so I think that's really like everything we do is the circle, even if it's just two people.
Yeah. When I started working at North Star, I guess it was 2010, I was a volunteer. 2011, I started on core staff, and two things struck me. One, I looked up at the board and there was a class called Harm and Punishment. And I thought, what's this about? Well, it turned out one of the staff members at that time was running circles. Well, it was a class run in a circle with readings and everything, but it was about crimes and how what punishment does and what alternatives might be. And she was somebody who also, interestingly, worked with victims uh, victims of the death penalty. So families uh, uh, who had experienced the death penalty within their family, somebody. So there were consequences of that. So that was an interesting resonance, I thought, with my restorative justice background. And then the other was walking by a classroom and I seen Ellen in there with about 15 kids, or maybe more, in a circle because something had happened and nobody had talked about restorative practices at that time. I don't know if you guys were using the term even explicitly at that time, but clearly restorative stuff was going on. And it's, as Ellen said, it's a continual conversation, and I feel that it's been so exciting for me as I joined the staff and we was doing a graduate degree at the IIRP in restorative practices. All my practical experience were at North Star for my coursework, and one of it was just talking to staff and saying, how do we feel about what we're doing? Is this Why are we doing this? Are we getting out of it what we want to? And I think those are all part of restorative. Ken, I see you wanting to
Yeah. Well, I
shut
just
down.
want to report a story from yesterday that a teen had taken a friend's cell phone and then messaged a third person something pretty rude. And the third person didn't like it and had told a staff member about it. So the other staff member and I got the two kids together, and there's no suspension or punishment. It was so we hear you took the other one's phone. What were you thinking when you did that? What were you hoping to do? And then you sent this message. What were you expecting that to do? And the one whose phone was taken and used for the message, we asked her, is this part of your friendship? How do you feel about that happening? And that's how we handle things. We pull them into a private room, and there was never any threat of punishment or suspension or detention or any other kooky schooling kind of thing. It was just like, what were you doing, and can you help us understand, and tell us more, and let's see how everybody feels about that, and then we'll pull back in the kid who received the message. He wasn't present for that meeting yesterday, but we'll be in later this week, and we'll pull him in and close up that circle.
To segue off that, I saw a question just came in. When dealing with children who are often unfamiliar with being honest with self or others, what are the strategies used to help them buy into these values at North Star? That's Tanya. Hi,
Yeah,
Tanya.
I actually think that the answer to that question is also part of the sort of button on how we do circles, which is that kids can call circles on staff as well. Like it's purely horizontal. It's not just that adults are always the ones having these. The students are told from day one, and we repeat it as many times as it takes to sink in. They can be displeased or feel harmed by or have conflict with any adult at North Star. All of us have to buy into the community agreement. And that is how we win their trust when they're not used to it. Since 70% of our kids are coming straight out of school systems, and many of them have sometimes mildly negative and sometimes really traumatic, toxic situations they're coming from. They regularly don't trust themselves. They regularly don't trust each other. They regularly definitely don't trust us. So the big things that we do practically are that we let them say no to us all the time, right? Apart from the basic agreements of we have to be kind enough and gentle enough with each other to all be here in pleasantness, they don't have to do anything. And if we offer them something and they say, no, I don't want to do that, we say, fine. And we mean it. And that is the most powerful piece, is that some of them will test for months. What if I do this? There's nothing to push against. And the softer we get, the less they push. And so between knowing that they can call us for a meeting and knowing that we really believe it when they say no, they start to behave differently.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
can
Yeah,
I add on?
yeah.
The other thing is that when teens come here, I routinely tell them that you could theoretically, and some people do in fact succeed at doing this without us. So if you don't like the way we do things here, I will coach you and your parents to file the homeschooling plan, claim your freedom, coach you to unschool, and you go live and be well and tell us to shove off because you don't like the stupid way we do things here. And you can do this without us. You don't need us. I mean, most people, actually practically do as a place to go, and they're not going to homeschool independently at 14 years old. But in theory, they don't have to have us. And so empowering them to say, you're allowed to not like us, and you can still do this glorious thing without us, I think is a helpful attitude to they're not expecting it. It sure catches them by surprise. I'll tell you that much.
And I've been in those meetings where kids had a concern about something I did or something I said or something they thought I said. And I think it's really empowering for kids to have that option. Yeah, you want to read that question?
Yes. I'm sorry. And Joe Power asked, how do you encourage a traditional school to adopt some of these ways and methods? I'm working with a few kids who are really struggling with the amount of expectations, yet the schools sticking to the rules. Are there small steps that schools can take? That's an interesting question.
I'm putting it to you, Ken, because I'm sure you get this question.
Sorry to be pessimistic here, folks. But back in 1996, I walked out of a public school, private school teaching career to start North Star because I couldn't see a reform path that I could make happen on my terms inside the system, or even at a private school that was required to make kids do English, math, history, science so that they could get all the credits they need to apply for, conventional competitive colleges.
Yeah.
I had to leave the system. And so, sure, individual teachers can close the door and do decent things. That can happen. But to really let kids not do math, to really let kids not come on Thursdays because they have a different place to go that's more important to them for a year, I don't see schools being able to respect kids in that way. To really have a policy that kids can leave the room and go to the bathroom whenever they need, or go sit outside, but and trust them to not cause trouble, or to walk down to the cafeteria or vending machines and get whatever they want when they need. Like, that's just not how schools work. They're not like community colleges. We could make high schools and junior highs like community colleges with that level of flexibility and freedom inside them, but we're not. I don't see that.
If I can interject there, Ken, I think that's where I came to in my professional life, because I never heard of North Star and there wasn't even homeschooling as an option when I started. community service foundation. So I was able to build some things into a system where we were taking kids out of the public schools. People did not have high expectations because they were being so outrageous. And we could do a lot of creative and interesting things and offer more choice, but it's still not the same. And yet, yes, you can do some of those things degrees of, and IIRP is in the business of trying to help people make something more sane and supportive for kids than a rigid, hierarchy of discipline. So, Joe Power, check out the IIRP. That's where Josh got his master's degree, and I founded that with my wife some years ago. But basically, I think Ken's right. You can only take it so far within a school, and yes, you can soften the nastiness of some of the ways we treat children.
Yeah, my test question is just imagine a school saying to a kid, you don't like it here, fine, you can leave at 16, go get your GED, we'll coach you, we'll support you, we'll have your back. We think that's perfectly fine for you to do. Leave here, don't stay here through age 18 and graduate from us. Just go get your GED and get on with your life. No one says that in a positive, constructive way. That's always seen as a defeatist, loser thing to do. And so I want to see schools say that with some gusto, and then we'll talk.
Yeah,
Ellen,
I think one of the key things to sort of as we're envisioning, right? Because you have to imagine what you want in order to make it happen in reality. Is I actually am not like against the word school, except that it's sort of been appropriated into this particular compulsory model, and I really don't like the model. But I'm a huge fan of public education, of collective, cooperative, like caring for all the kids in our societies. And so, to Inger's question about is the voluntary nature essential? I do agree with Ken and Josh. And it is essential because again, like kids know when they're being lied to, when they're being manipulated, right? They understand the system that they're in. And so the voluntary nature is essential. And yes, you can soften, you can shift, you can bring things in. I think one of the really interesting models being experimented with locally is a program that has decided to become a private school because it's the only way they can kind of exist, but they have multiple pathways. And you can choose a non-compulsory, more unschooly whole life learning style. You can choose a college preparatory model. You can choose a makerspace vocational model, performing arts, right? And I think that that's a thing that might be more appealing to school systems, is to start opening up different pathways that are equally valued and equally resourced, taking advantage of the infrastructure of our current system, but taking away the compulsory mandatory piece of everybody one size fits all.
all right.
Gosh, I'm
Yeah.
going to sign off for now and go to the room. So,
All right. Well, then I guess I didn't see any more questions, so I'm just going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Ellen and Ken. And I think they're going to stick around with us for anybody who wants to do some small group discussions. I put the link in the chat. This is the conclusion of our series, but we will be announcing some new things for the new year shortly. And again, thank you so much for being here with us, and it's been really fun to talk about expanding restorative into some radical education directions with you guys. So we're going to sign off here. I'm going to stay on. If you want to join the other Zoom, I'll keep putting the link so it shows up. And we'll catch you soon.